Story 1. The Shadow in the Woods and the Haunting of Willow Creek High. It was the autumn of my senior year at Willow Creek High, a small-town school nestled in the heart of rural America, where the air always carried the faint scent of pine and the promise of Friday night football. Our town, a sleepy hamlet with little to offer beyond the gridiron, lived for those games. The stands would fill with families, kids, and old-timers, all cheering for the Willow Creek Wolverines, a team that, for once, didn't suck. That year, the crisp October air buzzed with anticipation, and my best friend JJ, a smooth-talking charmer with a grin that could melt hearts, had big plans for the night. We were in an elective class that Friday, some half-baked course called Life Skills that was more about passing time than learning anything useful. JJ and I spent most of it goofing off, tossing paper balls and whispering about the game later. As the bell neared, JJ spun his chair toward two girls, Kayla and Ashley, who we'd known since middle school. With his usual flair, he invited them to join us at the game, his voice dripping with confidence. They giggled, exchanged glances, and agreed to meet us later. The plan was set. We'd hit the game, sneak some drinks, and maybe make a night of it. After school, JJ dropped me off at my house, a modest two-story on the edge of town, where I spent the next few hours pacing, hyped for the night. Around 7 p.m., his beat-up Ford pickup rumbled into my driveway, and we headed to pick up Kayla and Ashley. The girls climbed in, their laughter filling the cab as we drove to the school's back parking lot, a gravel patch bordered by a dense thicket of woods that seemed to swallow the moonlight. We had a stash of Four Locos hidden under the seats, and after checking for prying eyes, we poured the neon liquid into water bottles, a high school ritual as old as time. The game was a blast at first. We claimed the top row of the bleachers, the best seats for people watching, and sneaking sips from our bottles. The crowd roared as the Wolverines took the field, but by the third quarter, things went south. Our team started fumbling, and the scoreboard tilted heavily in favor of the visitors. As the fourth quarter rolled in, darkness settled over the field, the stadium lights casting long shadows. The Wolverines were getting crushed, and the stands began to empty, kids and parents trickling out, muttering about the loss. We stayed, though, too buzzed and stubborn to leave. The final whistle blew, and the field cleared out fast. The visiting team shuffled to their buses, our players slunk to the locker room, and within minutes, the bleachers were nearly deserted. It was just us, a handful of stragglers, and the quiet hum of the night. The field lights flickered off, plunging the area into near darkness, save for the pale glow of the moon. JJ, ever the instigator, suggested we head to the field to keep the party going. We sprawled out on the grass, laughing and passing around what was left of our drinks. Then JJ had another idea, one that sent a shiver down my spine. "Let's hit the wood in," he said, his eyes glinting with mischief. The woods behind the school were infamous, a tangled maze of pines and underbrush that kids whispered about. Stories of weird noises, ghostly figures, and missing pets had circulated for years, but JJ loved a challenge. Kayla and Ashley protested, their voices tight with fear, but JJ and I were already on our feet, sprinting toward the tree line. We knew the girls would follow. They wouldn't want to be left alone in the dark. We slipped under a torn section of the chain-link fence, a secret passage known to every kid in town. The woods were eerily quiet, the only sound our footsteps crunching on pine needles. JJ and I decided to mess with the girls, darting ahead and hiding behind a cluster of trees. We stifled our laughter as Kayla and Ashley's nervous calls echoed through the darkness. But then JJ grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "Dude, look," he whispered, pointing deeper into the woods. There, maybe 15 feet away, stood a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, its silhouette blacker than the night around it. The moonlight barely pierced the canopy, but I could make out its shape, broad, looming, and unnervingly still, positioned between two gnarled oaks. My heart pounded as I stared, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the shadows. Then it spoke. "You kids shouldn't be here," came a woman's voice, low and gravelly, like it had been scraped from the earth itself. The words hung in the air, chilling me to the bone. I froze, my eyes locked on the figure. It was a woman, or at least it sounded like one. But something was wrong. Her form seemed to shift, growing larger, closer without moving. No footsteps, no rustle of leaves. Just this oppressive presence, closing in. JJ and I bolted, our drunken haze burned away by panic. We shouted for Kayla and Ashley, who were stumbling through the underbrush, their faces pale with fear. We grabbed them and ran, scrambling back under the fence and piling into JJ's truck. As we peeled out of the lot, I glanced back at the woods, half expecting to see that figure emerging. Nothing, just darkness. We told the girls what we'd seen, describing the towering woman who seemed to glide without walking. They thought we were screwing with them, but JJ's shaking hands on the wheel told a different story. "If you hadn't seen it too," he muttered to me later, "I'd think I was losing it." We watched the woods from the safety of the truck for a while, but no one emerged. The question gnawed at us. Who or what was she? Why was she in those woods, a fenced-off patch of nowhere, in the dead of night? The incident faded into the background as the school year rolled on, but it never left me. That summer, I took a job as a custodian at Willow Creek High, a gig I'd done for a few years to earn extra cash. The school was empty, its halls echoing with the ghosts of the past year. I worked alongside 2 older custodians and another kid my age, spending long days mopping floors and scrubbing desks. One afternoon, I was mowing the grass in the school's central courtyard, the hum of the mower drowning out the world. As I pushed the machine across the lawn, a prickling sensation crawled up my neck. I looked up and saw her, a woman standing at an upstairs window in the math wing. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with short, curly hair framing a face that seemed wrong. The window's glare blurred her features, making her look almost featureless, like a smudged photograph. I stopped the mower and waved, expecting a nod or a smile. She didn't move, just stared. Heart racing, I sprinted inside to find my boss, a gruff man named Hank who'd worked at the school forever. I dragged him to the math wing, babbling about the woman in the window. But when we got there, the classrooms were dark, the doors locked. No one was there. Hank chuckled, clapping me on the shoulder. "Kid, you need some coffee, or a nap." But his joke didn't ease the knot in my stomach. Later that day, I was mopping the upstairs hallways, the math wing now silent and dim. I kept my radio on, blasting classic rock to drown out my unease. As I worked, I opened every classroom door, flipping on the lights to banish the shadows. Then over the music, I heard it, a voice clear as day. "Young man," it said, soft but commanding. A woman's voice. I froze, my mop clattering to the floor. The voice had come from one of the classrooms, but when I checked, they were all empty. I even looked behind desks, under tables, my pulse hammering in my ears. Nothing. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and that primal fight-or-flight instinct kicked in. I ran downstairs, found Hank, and told him everything. He sighed, humoring me by checking the wing again. Still nothing. Hank sent me home early, probably thinking I was cracking under the summer heat. But as I lay in bed that night, the pieces clicked together. The woman in the woods, the figure at the window, the voice in the hallway. They were connected. I didn't know how or why, but I was sure of it. For the rest of the summer, I refused to work in the math wing, sticking to the lower floors and avoiding those empty hallways. To this day, I believe Willow Creek High is haunted, not by some generic ghost, but by her, a woman whose presence lingers in the woods and the walls, watching, waiting. I've never gone back to those woods, and I never will. Some mysteries are better left alone. Story 2, The Stalker in the Shadows. I was 15, a sophomore at Jefferson High, a sprawling suburban school where cliques ruled and the cafeteria was a battlefield. Lunch was the only time I could hang with my best friends, Liam and Mike. But that year, the school's randomized schedule meant we were split up for most of the day. Our lunch table, a wobbly circular thing in the corner of the cafeteria, was our sanctuary, a place to trade jokes, complain about teachers, and plan our weekends. A few months into the school year, a new kid showed up in my first period astronomy class. The teacher, Mr. Callahan, a sarcastic guy who loved embarrassing students, made the kid stand at the front and introduce himself. His name was Craig, and he looked ordinary. A lanky white kid with patchy facial hair that looked like it was trying too hard. He had a nervous smile and eyes that darted around the room. Callahan teased him for a bit before pointing to an empty desk next to me in the back corner. Craig shuffled over, dropping his backpack with a thud. Class hadn't started yet, so the room was a chaotic hum of chatter. He glanced at me, nodded and said, "What's up?" I nodded back, introducing myself. He seemed all right, maybe a little awkward, but I figured starting at a new school had to suck. I decided to be friendly, asking where he was from, what brought him here. His answers were vague, something about his family moving for his dad's job. But he was chatty, and I didn't think much of it. We got paired up for an assignment, which meant grabbing laptops from the cart and researching constellations. As we worked, I started to notice things about Craig that set me on edge. His sense of humor was off, crude, overly familiar, like he thought we were lifelong buddies. He'd laugh too loud at his own jokes, a grating cackle that made my skin crawl. Every other word was a curse, and his comments veered into creepy territory, stuff about girls in the class that felt way too personal. I brushed it off, telling myself he was just trying to fit in. But by the end of the period, I was relieved to escape. We exchanged numbers for the project, a decision I'd soon regret. At lunch, I was sitting with Liam, Mike having ditched for the day, when I felt a presence behind me. A chair scraped, and there was Craig, plopping down like he owned the place. "What's up, buddy?" he said, slapping my shoulder. My stomach sank. Liam shot me a look, one eyebrow raised, but he played along, asking Craig about himself. It didn't take long for Craig to start acting weird again, making gross jokes, talking too loud, oblivious to the awkward silence that followed. Liam's polite smile faded, and he started giving me these what the hell glances when Craig wasn't looking. By the end of lunch, I knew I didn't want Craig around. There was something about him, not just awkwardness, but a darkness, like he was hiding something beneath the surface. After school, I walked home, a 10-minute trek through quiet suburban streets. I was texting my group chat, planning to hang at Liam's later, when my phone buzzed with a message from an unsaved number. "Turn around," Emma said. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I spun around and saw Craig jogging toward me, waving like we were old friends. "Oh God," I muttered, forcing a smile as he caught up. He asked where I lived, said he was nearby, and insisted on walking with me. The whole time he kept pushing, asking what I was doing later, suggesting we work on the project over beers. I deflected, saying I was busy with friends, but he wouldn't let it go. When he asked if he could come to Liam's, I panicked, blurting out some lie about Liam's mom not allowing strangers. He bought it, but I could feel his eyes on me as we walked. When we reached my house, I said a quick goodbye, hoping he'd take the hint. He didn't. A couple of hours later, as I was getting ready to head to Liam's, my phone lit up with another text from Craig. "Yo, what's going on in front of your house? Why is there a cop car?" My blood ran cold. I rushed to the front door, peering out the window. No cop car, just Craig standing in my driveway, laughing like a maniac. "Got you," he crowed, grinning. I was furious. "Why are you being weird?" I snapped. His face changed, the laughter replaced by a scowl. He muttered something about thinking I was cool, then stormed off. Back inside, my phone buzzed again. A long, ranting text about how I'd let him down, how I was just like everyone else. I screenshotted it and sent it to my friends, who were equal parts amused and creeped out. I emailed Mr. Callahan asking to work solo on the project and headed to Liam's to clear my head. That night around 11 p.m., I got home to an empty house. My parents were out with friends, my sister and her boyfriends. Nothing unusual. I locked the door, went to my room and started watching YouTube. Then the back doorbell rang, a distinct chime that echoed through the house. Thinking it was my sister, I jogged downstairs, but the backyard was dark and no one was at the door. I opened the main door, the screen still locked, and called out, "Hello?" A faint scrape, like a shoe on concrete, came from the left. My heart pounded as I slammed the door shut and relocked it. Back upstairs, I tried calling my dad, but he didn't answer. Then my phone rang. Craig. I let it go to voicemail, but a text followed. "Come outside." My hands shook as I typed. "I'm calling the police." To my shock, he replied, Okay, I'm leaving." It was him. He'd been in my backyard, lurking in the shadows. I sent the text to my family, friends, and the school, who contacted Craig's parents. Turns out, this wasn't new behavior. His family had moved multiple times because of his obsessive, troubling actions at other schools. He didn't show up to class on Monday, or ever again. Rumor had it he'd transferred, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching. Story 3, The Ghost of Chester. I grew up in rural New Brunswick, a place where the forests stretch endlessly and the winters bite hard. My senior year of high school was supposed to be my victory lap, but a string of bad grades meant I was back at Maple Ridge High as a 19-year-old, towering over the freshmen in a school that doubled as both middle and high school. It was a small, tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone, until the day Chester walked in. It was early September, the first day of school, and the air smelled of fresh-cut grass and nervous anticipation. I had study hall first period, a glorified free hour where kids whispered, doodled, or pretended to read. As I slouched at a desk, flipping through a dog-eared copy of The Catcher in the Rye, I noticed a new face across the room. He was lanky, with greasy hair, and a hoodie that looked 2 sizes too big. Something about him felt off, like he didn't belong in the bright fluorescence of the study hall. I decided to be the welcoming committee, mostly because I was bored. Crossing the room, I introduced myself, and he mumbled his name, Chester, saying he'd just moved to town. He had a strange way of talking, his eyes never quite meeting mine, but I chalked it up to new kid nerves. I offered to show him around, figuring it was the decent thing to do. As we wandered the halls, I pointed out the cafeteria, the gym, the shortcut to the science wing. He nodded, asking basic questions. How long I'd been here, where the bathrooms were. Then his questions got weird. So, where do you live? He asked, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. I laughed it off, thinking he was joking, but he pressed, asking for my Snapchat too. I gave him my username, why not, but dodged the address question, a red flag waving in my mind. We parted ways and I headed to my next class, brushing off the unease. Last period was English, a low-level class with only 9 kids, most of whom I'd known since kindergarten. I took my seat, ready to zone out, when I glanced across the room and saw Chester. He was slouched at a desk, tearing into a sandwich that looked like it had been scraped off a dumpster floor. Greasy, oozing, and wrong. He caught my eye and gestured for me to come over, his stare intense. Our teacher, Mr. Bess, was about to start, so I ignored him, burying my nose in my book. 5 minutes later, I looked up and he was still staring, his expression darker now, almost angry. He gestured again, more insistent. My phone buzzed, a Snapchat from Chester. Follow me, it said. I typed back, can't, we're in class, hoping he'd drop it. Instead, he stood, asked Mr. Bess for a bathroom pass, and slipped into the hall. Curiosity got the better of me. 5 minutes later, I asked for a pass too and stepped into the empty hallway. I spotted Chester at the far end, moving slowly, almost deliberately. I hung back, keeping my distance as he turned down a corridor that led to the school storage area, a dim, rarely used wing with bathrooms, offices, and a door to the basement. My gut told me to turn back, but I followed, my sneakers silent on the linoleum. Chester paused at a door, glanced around, and slipped inside. I crept closer and saw the sign, Basement Access. The basement was a no-go zone, a dank labyrinth of pipes and discarded furniture that even the custodians avoided. I stood there, my hand on the door, but something, instinct, fear, stopped me from opening it. Instead, I turned and hurried back to class, my heart racing. When I sat down, my phone buzzed again. A message from Chester. Why didn't you enter the basement? Then a photo, him in the basement, eating that vile sandwich under a flickering bulb. Another message. Come down here. I was done. I typed, leave me alone, and blocked him, my hands trembling. That night, I was home alone, my parents at a neighbor's and my siblings out. I was sprawled on my bed, slogging through homework, when my phone lit up with a Snapchat notification, a new friend request from an account called, Why Didn't You Enter the Basement? My stomach dropped. I blocked it, but minutes later, another request. Why did you block me? Then another, more sinister, "I know where you live." And finally, "I'm right outside your house." A crash shattered the silence, a window breaking downstairs. Panic surged through me as I dialed 911, whispering to the operator about the break-in. She told me to hide and lock the door. I scrambled into the hallway closet, crouching behind a pile of coats, my breath shallow. Footsteps thudded below, then creaked up the stairs. Through a crack in the closet door, I saw him, Chester, his silhouette stark in the moonlight. He moved down the hall, pausing to peer into rooms, his head turning toward the closet. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't open the door. He did, fumbling for the light switch, but the bulb was dead. I stayed still, hidden behind a storage bin, as he muttered to himself and retreated downstairs. Seconds later, a loud knock rattled the front door. The police. I bolted out, flinging the door open, and spilled everything to the officers. They searched the house, but Chester was gone, having slipped out through a basement window. The next day, I marched to the principal's office, ready to report Chester. What he told me chilled me to the core. There was no student named Chester at Maple Ridge High. No records, no enrollment. Security footage showed a figure sneaking in through a back entrance, blending in with the morning rush. He wasn't a student, just a ghost in our halls. The police traced the Snapchat accounts, but they led nowhere. Burner accounts tied to fake emails. I never saw Chester again, but his shadow lingers. Why did he want me in that basement? What was he planning? Some questions are better left unanswered, but I'll never forget the day I met the most dangerous person I've ever known. Story 4. The Substitute's Mistake. The sun hung low over the sprawling suburbs of Austin, Texas, casting long shadows across the parking lot of Westview High School. It was an ordinary Tuesday in early spring, the kind of day where the air carried the faint promise of summer. Emily Carter, a 24-year-old substitute teacher fresh out of college, pulled her beat-up Honda into the faculty lot. Her auburn hair was tied back in a loose bun, and her glasses slipped slightly down her nose as she juggled a thermos of coffee and a stack of lesson plans. She'd been subbing at Westview for 6 months, filling in for teachers on leave, and while she dreamed of a permanent position, the gig suited her for now. It was flexible, low pressure, and gave her time to figure out her next step. Emily's day was slated to be light: 4 math classes, 2 geometry, 2 algebra, covering for Ms. Maria Delgado, who'd called in sick for the week. The math hallway, tucked away on the ground floor in the school's labyrinthine left wing, was a quiet corner of the building. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, and the walls were lined with posters of Pythagorean theorems and quadratic equations. Emily preferred subbing for science classes, where she could pop in a documentary and call it a day, but math required her to actually teach. Still, she was good at it, and the kids, for the most part, liked her easygoing demeanor. By noon, she'd powered through her first 2 classes without incident. The students were restless but manageable, more interested in their phones than in solving for X. With a free period before her next class, Emily settled into Ms. Delgado's empty classroom, the air thick with the scent of dry erase markers. She opened her laptop, intending to grade a stack of worksheets, but her mind wandered. She scrolled through social media, sipped her coffee, and let the quiet hum of the school lull her into a false sense of calm. The trouble started during 6th period. Emily packed up her things and headed to the teacher's lounge, a small, dimly lit room at the back of the school near a locked exit. The lounge was a haven for subs, a place to escape the chaos of the hallways. It was usually empty, save for the occasional custodian or another substitute killing time. The back exit, secured by a keycard reader, was rarely used, and Emily barely gave it a thought as she set her bag on a table and pulled out her phone. A sharp knock on the glass door startled her. She glanced up, heart skipping a beat. Through the narrow window, she saw a man, middle-aged, clean-cut, with neatly trimmed gray hair, and a pressed button-down shirt tucked into khakis. A black jacket was slung over his shoulders, and he carried himself with the confident air of someone who belonged. He smiled, a disarming, almost charming smile, and motioned for her to open the door. Emily hesitated. The school had strict protocols about visitors, and she knew better than to let a stranger in without verification. But the man looked so ordinary, like a teacher who'd forgotten his ID. She approached the door, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum, and called through the glass, "Are you a teacher here?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied, his voice smooth and reassuring. "I'm Mr. Abrams' history department. Left my ID at home today. Silly mistake. Mind letting me in?" His name didn't ring a bell, but Westview had dozens of teachers, and Emily hadn't met them all. Against her better judgment, she swiped her key card and pulled the door open. The man thanked her profusely, brushing past her with a nod. As he moved, she noticed his right hand was buried deep in his jacket pocket. His fingers curled around something heavy. He walked with purpose, his steps quick and deliberate, heading straight for the math hallway. A chill ran down Emily's spine. Something wasn't right. She hurried back to the lounge, her heart pounding, and opened her laptop to access the school's staff directory. Her fingers trembled as she typed Abrams into the search bar. The screen loaded and her stomach dropped. No results. Not a single teacher, administrator, or staff member in the district had that name. Panic surged through her. She grabbed her phone and dialed the front office, her voice shaking as she explained what she'd done. I let someone in through the back door. He said he was a teacher, Mr. Abrams, but he's not in the directory. I think he's not supposed to be here." The secretary's tone shifted from calm to urgent. "Stay where you are, Emily. We're initiating a lockdown." Within seconds, the intercom crackled to life, a robotic voice echoing through the halls. "Lockdown! Lockdown! This is an emergency. All students and staff, secure your classrooms immediately." Emily's blood ran cold. She crouched behind a table in the lounge, her mind racing. Had she just endangered the entire school? The lockdown stretched on, agonizingly silent at first. Then from the direction of the math hallway came a sound that made her heart stop. A series of loud bangs like someone kicking a door. A man's voice, raw and unhinged, shattered the quiet. "Maria! Open the damn door! I know you're in there!" Emily's breath caught in her throat. Maria Delgado, the teacher she was subbing for. The man wasn't here by chance. He was looking for her. The bangs grew louder, more desperate, accompanied by incoherent shouts. Emily clutched her phone, debating whether to call 911 or stay hidden. Before she could decide, the wail of sirens filled the air outside. Police had arrived, their response lightning fast in a state all too familiar with school threats. From her hiding spot, Emily couldn't see what happened next, but she heard the commotion, shouted commands, the scuffle of boots, and finally silence. When the lockdown was lifted an hour later, she emerged, shaken, to find the school buzzing with police and shaken staff. The man, she learned, was Maria's ex-husband, a volatile figure from a marriage that had ended in bitterness. He'd come to the school armed, driven by a vendetta no one fully understood. Rumors swirled that Maria had done something to provoke him, though no one knew the details. She'd been absent all week, hiding from him, and hadn't returned to work since. Emily was racked with guilt. She'd let him in, a lapse in judgment that could have cost lives. The police assured her she'd acted quickly to report the breach, likely preventing a tragedy, but the weight of her mistake lingered. She continued subbing at Westview, but the incident changed her. She checked IDs religiously, questioned every stranger, and never again took the quiet of a school day for granted. Story 5. The Dorm Room Terror. Snow crunched under Sophie Nguyen's boots as she trudged across the campus of Emerson University in Massachusetts. It was late January, her freshman year, and the winter semester had wrapped the world in a blanket of ice and darkness. At 18, Sophie was still adjusting to life away from her family in California. The dorms, with their cinder block walls and communal bathrooms, felt like a far cry from home, but she'd found a rhythm: classes, study groups, and late-night pizza runs with her roommates. That evening, her last class, a lecture on American literature, had let out early around 5 p.m. The sky was already black, the campus lit by pools of yellow light from lampposts. Sophie pulled her scarf tighter against the biting wind and started the 10-minute walk to her dorm, a squat brick building on the edge of campus. Her phone buzzed in her pocket and she fished it out, expecting a text from her roommate, Mia. Instead, it was an alert from the university, the words screaming in all caps: Attention, all faculty and students, suspicious individual on campus. Male making threatening comments to female students, claiming to be armed, seek shelter immediately. Police notified. Sophie's heart lurched. She quickened her pace, her breath clouding in the frigid air. The campus, usually bustling with students, felt eerily deserted. She glanced over her shoulder, scanning the shadows for movement. Nothing, just the wind whistling through the bare trees. Still, the text had her on edge, and she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Halfway to her dorm, she noticed a figure behind her. A man, maybe 30 yards back, his silhouette bulky in a massive winter coat. She couldn't make out his face, but his gait was steady, purposeful. Her mind raced. Was he a student, a professor, or the man from the alert? She told herself she was being paranoid. The text hadn't mentioned race or description, but her instincts screamed at her to move faster. When she reached her dorm, Sophie fumbled with her student ID, swiping it to unlock the outer door. The lock clicked, and she slipped inside, the glass door swinging shut behind her. She was about to open the inner door when a loud bang echoed through the vestibule. She spun around, her pulse hammering. It was him, the man from the path. He stood at the outer door, his face pressed close to the glass, his breath fogging the pain. Up close, she could see he was older, maybe in his 30s, with a scruffy beard and wild, bloodshot eyes. "Please, let me in," he called, his voice muffled but desperate. "It's freezing out here." Sophie's hand hovered over the door handle. Every fiber of her being told her to run, but his pleading expression tugged at her empathy. Maybe he was just a student who'd lost his ID. She steadied her voice and asked, "Do you live here? What's your room number?" "I'm on the 3rd floor," he said quickly, dodging her second question. "Come on, I'm freezing," she asked again, firmer this time. "What's your room number?" He ignored her, his tone shifting from pleading to menacing. "Open the damn door, or you'll regret it." His lips curled into a snarl, and he began spewing vile, graphic threats, words so crude and violent that Sophie's knees buckled. He licked the glass, his tongue leaving a smear, and leered at her, describing in sickening detail what he'd do if he got inside. Horror propelled her forward. She bolted through the inner door, sprinting down the hall to her room. Her hands shook as she unlocked the door and stumbled inside, slamming it behind her. The room was dark, her roommate still out. She flicked on the lights, her chest heaving, and grabbed her phone to text her dorm's group chat. "The guy from the alert is at the front door. Don't go near it. I think he's dangerous." Replies flooded in, a chorus of panic. "OMG, call the police!" Sophie found the university police number online and dialed, her voice trembling as she explained what had happened. The dispatcher asked if the man was still there. Against her better judgment, Sophie crept to her window, which overlooked the dorm's entrance. She parted the blinds and screamed. He was there, right outside her ground floor window, his face inches from the glass. His lips twisted into a grotesque smile, and he shook his head slowly, his tongue flicking out in a mocking, obscene gesture. Sophie's scream echoed through the phone, and she pleaded with the dispatcher. "He's at my window, please. Send someone now." The man's eyes locked onto hers for a moment longer. Then he turned and sprinted into the darkness, vanishing beyond the reach of the lampposts. Sophie sank to the floor, sobbing, her phone still clutched in her hand. Minutes later, a police officer arrived at her door. She let him in, her voice hoarse as she described the man. Tall, black, in a bulky coat, with a scruffy beard and a predatory stare. The officer told her to stay in her room and warned her to spread the word to her dormmates. A second campus-wide alert went out, this time specific to her building. The police searched all night, their flashlights sweeping the campus like ghostly beacons. They never found him. Sophie didn't sleep, haunted by the man's face and the threats he'd hurled through the glass. The university beefed up security for the rest of the week, but the incident left a permanent mark. Sophie moved off campus the following year, unable to feel safe in the dorms. She still checks behind her when she walks at night, and the sound of a knock on a door makes her heart race. Story 6, The Crayon Pass. Troy Ellis was 7 years old, a wiry second grader with a mop of sandy hair and a penchant for trouble. He wasn't a bad kid, just different. At Meadowbrook Elementary, a cheerful school in suburban Ohio, Troy struggled to fit in. He'd blurt out random facts in class, fidget endlessly, and occasionally do things that left his teachers baffled. His parents suspected he might have ADHD, but no one had pushed for a diagnosis. To Troy, the world was a kaleidoscope of distractions, and school was both a playground and a maze. Mondays were his favorite day because of art class. The art room, with its paint-splattered tables and walls plastered with student drawings, was a haven. Ms. Green, the art teacher, was young and kind, with a knack for making every kid feel like Picasso. That day, the class was working on clay sculptures, and Troy was engrossed in molding a lumpy dinosaur. The room buzzed with chatter and the squish of clay, Ms. Green weaving between desks to offer pointers. Troy, true to form, didn't follow rules to the letter. When he felt the urge to use the bathroom, he didn't raise his hand or ask permission. Instead, he quietly grabbed the art class's bathroom pass, a giant plastic crayon, bright green and absurdly oversized, and slipped out the door. The hallway was empty, the linoleum gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The bathroom was at the far end, past rows of lockers and bulletin boards covered in construction paper stars. Inside the bathroom, Troy chose a stall, as he always did, preferring the privacy. He was sitting there, humming to himself, when the loudspeaker crackled to life. The principal's voice, usually warm and cheerful, was taut with urgency. "Attention, all students and staff. This is a lockdown. This is not a drill. Secure your classrooms immediately." Troy's heart plummeted. A lockdown? They'd practiced them before, huddling in the corner of the classroom with the lights off. But those were just drills. This was real. He yanked up his pants, grabbed the plastic crayon, and bolted out of the bathroom. The hallway was a ghost town, every classroom door shut, blinds drawn, lights off. He was alone, exposed, and terrified of getting in trouble. Or worse. He started toward the art room, clutching the crayon like a talisman, when he saw a figure at the far end of the hall. A man, tall and disheveled, in a stained jacket and jeans. He wasn't a teacher. Troy knew every adult in the school, and this guy didn't belong. The man's eyes locked onto Troy, and he smiled, a crooked, unsettling grin. "Hey, kid," he called, his voice low and gravelly. "You lost." Troy's mouth went dry. He managed to squeak, "I'm locked out of my classroom." The man's smile widened. "No problem. Come with me. I know a safe place." He extended a hand, his fingers calloused and dirty. Troy took a step back, his instincts screaming. The man moved closer, his hand still outstretched, when a shout pierced the air. "Troy!" It was Ms. Green, her voice sharp with panic. She sprinted down the hall, her cardigan flapping, and grabbed Troy's arm, yanking him away from the man. "Get away from him!" she shouted, her eyes blazing. The man's smile vanished. He lunged forward, but Ms. Green was faster. She dragged Troy back to the art room, shoving him inside and locking the door behind them. The classroom was dark, the other students huddled in the corner, their wide eyes fixed on Troy. Ms. Green's hands trembled as she dialed the front office, her voice low but urgent. "There's a man in the building. He tried to take one of my students." Troy sank to the floor, the plastic crayon still in his grip. The lockdown lasted nearly an hour, the silence broken only by the distant sound of police radios. When it was over, the principal announced an early dismissal, and parents flooded the school to retrieve their children. Troy's mom hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. Later, he learned the man had been a drifter, possibly unstable, who'd wandered into the school through an unlocked maintenance door. Ms. Green's quick thinking had saved Troy from an uncertain fate, kidnapping or something far worse. The incident left Troy quieter, more cautious. He never took the bathroom pass without permission again, and the sight of that green crayon, once a quirky relic of art class, now filled him with dread. Story 7. The Band Hall Breach. The Mississippi Gulf Coast in spring is a humid, salty haze, the air thick with the scent of magnolias and saltwater. For Lucas Moreno, a junior at Gulfview High School, it was home, a place of lazy beach days and the relentless rhythm of high school life. At 16, Lucas was a lanky kid with a mop of dark hair and a quiet intensity. He played double bass in the school's wind ensemble, a role that suited his love of music and his need for structure. The band hall, a cavernous room filled with the clang of percussion and the wail of brass, was his sanctuary. It was a Thursday morning in May 2019, and the ensemble was deep into rehearsal for their spring concert. Lucas stood at the back, his double bass towering over him, its deep notes anchoring the piece. The band director, Mr. Callahan, was a wiry man in his 50s, his baton slicing through the air with precision. The music swelled, a complex arrangement of Holst's planets, when a faint knock interrupted the flow. Lucas, positioned near the exterior door, heard it first. No one else seemed to notice, the ensemble too caught up in their performance. Before Mr. Callahan could react, Jake, a percussionist with a habit of acting first and thinking later, strode to the door and flung it open. Lucas's stomach twisted. They'd been drilled never to open that door without checking the window, never to let in anyone without a student ID. The door locked automatically, so students often knocked to be let in, but this felt different. A man stepped inside, moving with a predator's confidence. He was middle-aged, maybe 5 feet 6 inches, with a lean build and a gray hoodie pulled low over his face. Cargo shorts hung loosely on his hips, and both hands were stuffed in his hoodie pocket, clutching something heavy. Lucas's eyes darted to the bulge. Too angular, too solid to be anything but a weapon. The music faltered, then stopped. Mr. Callahan lowered his baton, his face paling. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice tight. The man's eyes swept the room, lingering on the students. "I'm here to check out my daughter," he said, his English halting, tinged with an accent Lucas couldn't place. "This isn't the place for that," Mr. Callahan snapped, stepping forward. "You need to leave." The man didn't budge. "Where do I go then?" To Lucas's shock, Mr. Callahan pointed toward the main hallway. "Out those double doors, right? To the front office." His tone was calm, almost deferential, as if he were defusing a bomb. The man nodded and strode out, his hand still in his pocket. The door swung shut behind him, and the band hall fell silent. Lucas gripped his bass, using it as a makeshift shield, his mind racing. Had Mr. Callahan just sent an armed stranger deeper into the school? The director didn't hesitate. He grabbed his phone and called security, his voice low and urgent. Within moments, the intercom blared, "Lockdown! Lockdown! This is an emergency!" Mr. Callahan flicked off the lights, and the students scrambled to hide. Lucas and a few others crammed into a storage locker meant for tubas, the metal walls cold against their backs. The air was thick with fear, the only sound their shallow breathing. 5 minutes later, footsteps thundered past the band hall, security guards moving at a sprint. Lucas peeked through a crack in the locker, catching a glimpse of their vests and drawn weapons. The lockdown dragged on for 15 agonizing minutes before the all-clear sounded. When they emerged, the band hall felt different, tainted. No official statement came from the school. The administration swept the incident under the rug, likely to protect their reputation, but whispers spread among the students. The man, they said, was a fugitive, fresh off an armed robbery at a nearby gas station. He'd fled on foot, ducking into the school to evade the police, using the daughter story as a ruse. When security caught him, they found a loaded handgun in his hoodie. Lucas was shaken. He'd been 15 feet from a man who could have turned the band hall into a bloodbath. Mr. Callahan's decision to direct the man inside rather than out haunted him. Had the director been trying to avoid a confrontation, or had he simply frozen? Either way, the incident exposed how fragile school safety could be. Lucas kept playing in the ensemble, but he never looked at the band hall door the same way again. Story 8. The Crazed Intruder St. Agnes Catholic School was a small, tight-knit institution in a quiet Virginia town, its red brick buildings surrounded by oak trees and manicured lawns. For 9-year-old Clara Sullivan, a 4th grader with freckles and a love of books, it was a second home. The school's routine was comforting. Morning prayers, classes, and regular lockdown drills that felt more like a game than a precaution. Clara and her classmates giggled during the drills, piling into the corner of the classroom while their teacher, Mr. Donahue, pretended to be stern. It was a crisp fall morning when everything changed. Clara's class was in the middle of a history lesson, Mr. Donahue scribbling notes about the American Revolution on the chalkboard. The intercom buzzed and the front office secretary's voice came through, clipped and urgent. "We're going into lockdown. This is not a drill. Secure your classrooms now." The room froze. Clara's classmates exchanged nervous glances, some still smirking, expecting a prank. But Mr. Donahue's face told a different story. He moved swiftly, locking the door and lowering the blinds. "Everyone, to the corner," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Stay quiet." Clara huddled with her classmates, her knees pressed to her chest. The classroom was dark, the only light filtering through the narrow window in the door. For a moment, there was only silence, thick and oppressive. Then from the hallway came a sound that turned Clara's blood to ice. A man's voice, raw and unhinged, screaming incoherently. The screams grew louder, closer, until they were right outside the door. Clara's heart pounded as the man's words became clear, each one a dagger. "Your God is dead. Jesus didn't die for you. You're all gonna burn." The words were laced with venom, punctuated by violent bangs on the door. Clara's classmates whimpered, some crying softly. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying the door would hold. The man's voice took on a new edge, taunting. "I hear you in there. I see you. Open the door." Clara peeked at the window and saw his silhouette, a shadowy figure pounding the glass. He was chanting now, words she didn't understand but later learned were phrases in Arabic, twisted into a tirade against their faith. The hatred in his voice was palpable, a force that seemed to seep through the walls. Mr. Donahue stood by the door, his face pale but resolute. He whispered reassurances, but his eyes betrayed his fear. The banging intensified, the door rattling in its frame, and Clara was certain it would give way. Then from down the hall came new voices, deep, authoritative shouts. "Police!" The man's screams turned to curses, then faded as the commotion moved away. Clara heard a scuffle, a thud, and then silence. The lockdown lasted another 20 minutes, each second an eternity. When the principal finally announced it was over, the school day was canceled. Clara's mom arrived within minutes, her face streaked with tears as she pulled Clara into her arms. The school was abuzz with police and shaken parents, but no one spoke openly about what had happened. The man, Clara later heard, was a disturbed individual with a history of mental illness, driven by a warped vendetta against the church. He'd entered through a side door, exploiting a momentary lapse in security. Clara struggled with the aftermath. The screams lingered in her dreams, and she flinched at loud noises for months. St. Agnes increased its security, but the sense of safety Clara once felt there was gone. She was grateful no one was hurt, but the incident left a scar, a reminder that even a place as sacred as her school wasn't immune to the world's darkness.